The dedication of the 14th of September to the elevation of the cross is a very ancient Christian tradition. In fact, it began in 335 AD. Emperor Hadrian, the pagan emperor who persecuted Christians, put many to death and put financial persecutions upon them, sought to obliterate, wipe from the face of the earth the remembrance of the cross. And so he had a pagan temple to the goddess Venus built over the site of Golgotha in an attempt to destroy and end this Christian tradition. But of course here we see how even through the apparently evil workings of the world, God is victorious. Inadvertently, the pagan emperor marked the very spot of Golgotha. He preserved the place for Christians. And so when Saint Constantine the Great became emperor and was converted to the Christian faith through a sign, a vision of the cross, he sent his mother, Saint Helena, to Jerusalem to seek out this place. The first thing she did when she arrived in Jerusalem was to destroy the pagan temple. And when they excavated beneath where it stood, there they found 3 crosses, and also the plaque on which Pilate had had the inscription to mock Christ, and also the nails of his suffering. And they were unsure which of the crosses belonged to Christ. And so they took them to a corpse. And at the touch of one of the crosses, the corpse was brought back to life. And word of this miracle spread quickly. Huge crowds gathered to venerate the cross of Christ. In fact, the crowds became so large that the Patriarch of Jerusalem had the cross raised up so that the crowds could see it, and they prostrated before it. The meaning of this festival is different to other days in the year when we remember the cross. On other days, even at Pascha, we think of how we must take up our cross. We think of the self-sacrifice it represents to us in our lives. But the Feast of the Elevation of the Cross on the 14th of September is really where we focus entirely on the cross of Christ. We remember that he is a crucified Redeemer. This is important because as Orthodox, we rightly focus on the incarnation and on the resurrection. We worship Christ who is both God and man. We worship Christ who raised himself from the dead and overcame death. But we mustn't lose sight that he suffered and died on the cross. Particularly for many converts to Orthodoxy who perhaps are reacting against the Protestant and Latin heresies of the atonement theories. They want to distance themselves from these heretical ideas that somehow God's anger had to be paid off or the devil was paid off. They somehow push this so far away that they lose sight that it is a suffering Redeemer that we worship. The cross and Christ's suffering is a sign of his love for us. But of course, it's foolishness to the world. And just as the pagan emperor sought to obliterate Golgotha, so too the world would rather overcome what it sees as the foolishness of the Christ, the foolishness of Christ's death on a cross. St. Gregory Palamas says to us, whenever we contemplate God, contemplate his beauty, his goodness, but also his death on a cross, he says a strange phrase, that we crucify the world in our heart. In other words, we put to death the vision of the world. We take on board the reality of the victory of Christ, the victory of God in weakness and vulnerability. What is foolishness to the world is the victory of God in his humility, in his love and in his suffering. And we are called to recognize that we are not to seek power, finance, money, status, all these things that the world values, because the cross is a greater treasure than all the riches of the kingdoms of the earth. The cross is our treasure. It is God's victory and weakness.